So what is clear to me is that the role of the interviewer is, again, it is not about the interviewer. It is about the person you're interviewing. It is, how do I get the best out of that person for our audience?
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today is Jill Schlesinger. Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it is a delight to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Jill, the delight is mine. We've worked together in the past on one of probably the most exciting events I've done, honestly, in the 20 years I've been booking speakers. And we're going to get into a little bit of that. We're going to relive some past moments. But I just want to extend a great appreciation to our audience, those who have returned. Thanks for coming back. Those first timers, we appreciate you giving us a shot. Please subscribe. Please hit the bell. Please like us, love us. Share us with everybody and anybody who you think is going to benefit from this. So Jill, let's get right into a little bit of the heart of the matter here. You know, you're a business owner. You've also been a financial advisor, among many, many other things, radio host, podcaster, TV personality, dare I say. Let's address our first part of this conversation to event professionals that you know so well from the keynotes that you deliver, the moderating that you do. You know, your background in the world of, let's say, financial services in that whole circle, what can you share? What lessons could you impart that could be related to meeting professionals that deal with budgets, planning, projections, attendance, justifying return on investment for some of these events that cost so much? Just bring us into your view of that world and what you could impart to them.
You know, I think live events are amazing because I do believe that it is really the fabric of how professionals like to connect with one another. And I think that generally speaking, you know, depending on the event, having an engaging speaker or having a person who can help bring to the audience some awesome content is really great. Now, I mean, it's weird because I have two sides to this. One is I've obviously been an attendee to many a conference because I was in financial services for many years, and I basically would think that they're mostly pretty boring. And even the people who are extremely smart and wonderful to read are not the greatest speakers. And Seth, as you know, the art of bringing an audience to life is an art. It is not a science. So I think that if you are considering content that would, you know, I think generally be seen as more professional content, you still want somebody who can take the best of the brains that you have and bring it to the audience in a way the audience can absorb it. So in my world, you know, sometimes I will be asked to do a more technical conference, right? So, hey, Jill, we've got a bunch of CPAs in the audience, and we need you to do a fun interview, but also a serious interview. And, you know, I think that the fun interviews are more challenging for me because it's not my lane. So, you know, I'll scorch the earth. I'll do the research. I'll make sure I know everything I need to know about Coach K, who I interviewed in front of 2,000 CPAs. But if I have to take somebody who's doing practice management for an organization, that to me is more comfortable in many ways. And then I can let somebody else be the expert and let that person shine. And so I think what many people don't realize about the content, which really is important, is that you really need to bring the content and make it live. And that is half science, half art, and making sure you have the right people up on that stage to connect with your audience is really going to justify the expense, or you're going to feel like you threw your money out the window.
You know, that's what we do here, Jill. When we brought you in to moderate with Julie Andrews, did you hear the mic drop? Because that was a name drop right there.
Yeah, it was great. Dame Julie Andrews.
Julie Andrews, pardon me, who, by the way, and this is corroborated by you, she's more Mary Poppins than Mary Poppins herself.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I learned a ton in that interview process. And, you know, what happened was there was a financial services firm that wanted to have a big event. And I think what they really wanted was somebody who could do a one-on-one high-profile interview that would be fun for the audience, but also be able to schmooze with the audience and be comfortable doing that. So, Seth, if you remember, one of the things that was interesting about that whole weekend was that they wanted me to be at a luncheon with the female finance professionals
That's
or
right.
do drinks with and that's something I think that the person who's doing the interviewing, if you have some comfort level, like it's nice to know who the audience is. So, the other part of that which was still by far the very best interview I've ever done. I mean, I can't imagine it ever being bested. I learned a lot in that interview process because we were doing pre-interviews, and Jules, as I've come to know that she is referred to as, Dame Julie Andrews, had somebody who was very protective of her in a wonderful way, a longtime agent who was very clear about what could and could not be asked. And what was fascinating in that, I'm sure you remember this, Seth, that we had like a pre-interview call, and it was
sure
like,
do.
don't talk about this, don't talk about this. Very curt, very, doing his job. But when I met her backstage before we went on, it was like a different human being that we were talking about. It was somebody who was just a kind, open-hearted person. Some of the topics that the agent said, you cannot bring this up or this up, she brought up herself. And so I think that in many respects, that interview was so instructive for me because I was interviewing an idol, but I treated it with great respect. I did a ton of research, and I wanted to make sure that it was fun for everybody who was watching. And Seth, you actually gave me great advice on this because you said, look, a lot of people in this audience who are of a certain age will say, that's Mary Poppins, that's Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music. And then you reminded me that there were also younger people in the audience who were like, no, they know her from The Princess Diaries or from her children's books. And so, you're trying to weave a narrative through a beginning, middle, and end to a story over the course of 45 minutes that engaged everybody. And there was, I will admit to you, that 5-minute indulgence where I went on a Sondheim rant with Julie Andrews that was amazing. But I did turn to the audience and said, okay, we're about to go down a Sondheim rabbit hole. Hang in there. We'll be back in 5 minutes, which was great. And I do think that you want to make the interview fun for the audience and for the person who's being interviewed. And she was such a champ, such a pro. And I'm sure that there are some people who might do this. And, after being at CBS News now for, 15 years, that I've met plenty of people in the green room who you can see they're just sleepwalking through it, right?
Yeah.
They're going on a press junket. I think you should be very careful about the people you hire as the people who are like the talent or the big interview, because you really want to make sure they want to be there for more than the paycheck. And she made that day come alive for the audience members, for me, and she actually generally had a good time. Why do I know that? Because 8 years later, I became acquainted with her through another person who knew her. And she says, oh, yeah, I remember that event. That was a great event.
Yeah. One of the things that just strikes me, if recalling that event, which was now years ago, but, not only your preparation, but what I want to underscore for our audience, which again are these meeting professionals that are in partnership with me curating this content, which is really the connective tissue, as you stated, where you have attendees that are maybe having to attend something to get some continuing education credit, but they want to be inspired and ideally get close to somebody that they would never have access to, and even take it further, maybe have some takeaways that they can apply to their personal and or professional life. But you thread the needle on both sides of the coin, if that's even a possible phrasing, where you have the moderating and the ability to do the keynote. And in this particular event that we had Dame Julie Andrews, or Dame Jules, as she's known in her inner circle, which apparently you're stepping into or have stepped into, is that you did so much of your homework and you were so comfortable as the moderator, but as a keynoter, you knew the audience, which was a large financial services organization. So you had all those cylinders firing. And dare I say, not only a Sondheim rabbit hole, but you were more of a Broadway geek nerd than maybe she was, because you were bringing up stuff from her past. But what I want to underscore here, Jill, and I'm sure you've seen this, an organization will bring in a big name and they are insistent that their CEO, their COO, whomever, the president of sales, the marketing person is going to do the moderating. And it's not that I want to do another booking and get another moderator in. It's such a big investment, and you have to ensure that you're going to extract, squeeze, get the most juice out of what you've brought in. And I just can't say enough about your ability to do that. And that's from years of being on CBS and having your shows and being able to understand you're inhabiting what the audience needs.
I think it's a great point because I have been in the audience where you have some people in an organization where, they're really great at it. And, a couple of people come to mind when I think about that. So, oftentimes I will be asked, can you do this thing for our LGBTQ group? Because I happen to be gay. And they're like, well, we usually have the head of the Pride Network who does this. And, I think it's just that I approach it from a very different angle because, the job of the interviewer is really to bring out the best in the interviewee. And I think that the challenge is if you're the CEO, the marketing person, the CFO, what you'll fall back on is making sure that that person knows that you're really smart. And no one cares if you're really smart. They kind of assume it, And what was interesting, I did an engagement for a Fortune 500 company, and they said, well, the CFO wants to interview you about the economy. And I said, okay. And they wanted to do a pre-interview. I said, I don't do a pre-interview. Don't do a pre-interview. I said, I know every company wants to do that. It's a waste of time. You can just say, here are here's a few big bullet points. But I said, it's not going to, you want a dynamic interview. You do not give your interviewee the questions in advance. You say, here are the themes that we're going to touch on. We're in the lane. It's the stuff you do all the time. And if the person needs to know the questions in advance, then that is probably not going to be a great interview. So what is clear to me is that the role of the interviewer is, again, it is not about the interviewer. It is about the person you're interviewing. It is how do I get the best out of that person for our audience? When we have correspondents who are doing these lengthy interviews on 60 Minutes, on CBS Sunday Morning, these are like the best of the best. And what I have learned from these folks is that they have an arc of a story that they're trying to sort of weave together, right? And in an interview, you have ideas about questions you want to ask, but you have to be able to go off script. And if you're not, then you're going to be looking down at this card saying, oh, no, it's question 4 time. No, I got to get to question 5. That's not a fun interview. So over prepare, be ready, have a few questions or have an idea in your mind where you want to go. If you don't trust yourself, or if you as an organization don't trust the person to be able to make that happen, splurge a few more bucks and make it something that is lasting and important and get more out of the person who's the interviewer, maybe with a few other sides that they'll bring to the table. Oh yeah, of course I'll do the luncheon before. Oh yeah, you need me to come in and sign books? Of course I'll do that. Oh yeah, you want me to come to the cocktail party the night before? Of course I'll do that. Because most people want to do that. And I think, again, one of the issues is that, you better be a great speaker to give a keynote, right? It was funny because I remember when AICPA, which is the organization, sort of like the body behind CPAs in the United States, right? And when the AICPA came to me and they said, well, we're going to have this person do a keynote or you could do a chat with them. I said, the chat's going to be better, I promise. And, the chats are always more interesting because if you have a good interviewer, they're going to go off the script. If you're listening to podcasts and you think about the podcasts that are really good, that are live interview podcasts, they're the ones that are not scripted. So, I love Mark Maron. I don't love every single guest, but I love his ability to be able to extract from people something that you did not know about them. And that to me is like, that's the magic of the live moment.
Yeah. And, we're going to move on from Dame Jules in a moment, but, you said spend a little bit extra money. And again, it's not about that. It's about having that professional be able to make your guest, the person that's been invited, shine, but to also connect it to the attendees and the audience. And you made a point about how when we got on, her decades, over 50 decades, her manager, agent, representative was very protective. I call it, they get into goalkeeper mode, which is
Right.
completely understandable. We know the game, you and I both. More often than not, then you meet her in person. And then during the actual interview, she's bringing up all of the off limits, prohibited topics. I was recently with a very well-known comedian. They've had their own HBO specials, their own TV shows. They've been in first run movies. And we had organized a 7 a.m. VIP breakfast. And I get a call. I'm waiting to receive them at this hotel in Las Vegas. The night before, they get in, and I had gotten a call while I was literally waiting in the service parking lot to bring them up the service elevator to their suite. And I get a call from the team, from his team saying, yeah, breakfast isn't going to happen. And I'm like, wait a minute, it was in the offer. It was, so I had never met this person in person before, booked them before, but I was on site for this event. So I'm like, I got about 40, 50 floors to figure this out in the service elevator. So I just said, there was a question about tomorrow morning's breakfast. And they're like, what time is breakfast? I said, well, it's at 7 a.m. And he said to me, he said, well, you probably need to come and get me around 6:45 so we can get there on time. And that was it. I didn't even bring up, well, your office set or anything like that. So often it's the people around them and not them themselves. So, you have to take that with a grain of salt. And I just want to underscore that because it's not tooting our own horn, but this is, you have decades of experience as a professional dealing with these rarefied air, high dignitary type speakers. And I do that as well. So that we're in good hands. I know when I bring you into my clients, we're in great hands. So I just wanted to underscore that a little bit. I want to move on if we can, Jill, turn the corner a little bit. Your book, The Great Money Reset, you look at how individuals can make significant financial changes. But here's the key, in uncertain times. It seems like we're chronically in uncertain times, or at least that's the water we've been swimming in lately. Can you tie in parallels for event professionals and even business leaders and draw from your approach to navigating that economic uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, look, I am somebody who has been a career transitioner. So I'm kind of a little bit of like the kind of person who likes the idea of a big change. Most people don't. And the reason I wrote this book called The Great Money Reset really was about the shifts that were taking place amid COVID. And the biggest shift took place, even myself. So, all right, you're an event planner, and now you're no longer having events because we're all shut down, right? And we did the same thing in news. It's like, well, we're in remote studios. We now are getting sent cameras and microphones, and we're doing all this stuff. And for me in my podcast, the biggest change was that I had a corporate sponsor, Goldman Sachs, and it was their contract. We were set to renew it. It was supposed to renew in March of 2020, and the world was going crazy. And they said, listen, we're not going to renew it. We don't know. It's too uncertain. We can't do this. So the podcast is called Jill on Money. It was twice a week we would drop it. And, frankly, I am so, because I come from industry, not like the media industry, but industry, I'm very sensitive to the needs of the client. So in this world where one big advertiser is writing one big check to put on the podcast, what I understood was that they wanted a voice in the content, even though at times I disagreed with them and I'd push back a little bit, but it was their money and I get it.
Yeah.
So it's the middle of March. They're like, yeah, no, we're not doing this. And at the same time, my executive producer, Mark Talercio, says to me, we're getting just an enormous number of emails that are flying in. People are freaking out. They don't know what to do. No one knows how to claim unemployment insurance. People are scared. And I said, all right, and the markets were moving like, 3, 4, 5% daily. And so I said, let's go to a daily podcast. It'll be like the emergency session. So we went from 2 podcasts a week to 7 shorter episodes.
Wow.
And it was something that
you went into triage.
Yeah, and it was really about responding to the inflow of the people who were listening. And what was fascinating to me is I'd always felt like as much as big name interviews were interesting to the advertiser, the underwriter, I thought that real people were always the most fascinating to me. Everybody's got an interesting story and everybody's got a way to think about money and we're all voyeurs in some way, right? This is old-time talk radio, right? First time, long time listener, first time caller, long time, first time, right? And so we started and I would just read emails that were coming in that were representative of all the other emails. And we would talk about what happened in the day and what had to happen. And we would end the show every day with something that just came up organically where I would say, wash your hands, wear your mask, and be nice to each other. That was how I ended every episode for essentially a year. And so, we did that and I self-financed the podcast. The podcast company said, we have no advertisers. Like the business has gone away. Wow. I said, you know what? Screw it. Let's just try this. It's March. People have been very loyal to me and to my brand. I can afford to underwrite this myself. I'm going to pay for me and my producer and everything else. And I just said to them, just make sure it gets out there. And, in fact, what actually happened, we went from these 2 40-minute episodes a week with quote unquote high profile names to regular people. And our audience downloads quintupled by the end of the year. And now we're just in a plain old ad-based model. But in that time, I learned that people were really looking for assistance, guidance, mentorship, coaching, call it what you want. And what they also were doing was asking permission from me. I'm a certified financial planner still. I don't practice anymore, but I keep the designation. I work really hard to make sure I know what's going on. And they wanted permission to do something different with their lives as a result of this massive upheaval called COVID. And we would talk through what were the kinds of changes people wanted to make. I want to do this. I don't want to do this. I'm scared of this. Do I have enough money? And we gave them guardrails to be able to make more considered decisions so that they wouldn't blow up their financial life. And out of those conversations came this book called The Great Money Reset. And, the subtitle is Change Your Work, Change Your Wealth, Change Your Life. Because, look, I deal with money, okay? And it can be an incredibly boring topic, except it's ubiquitous. So it doesn't surprise me every time CBS News does some sort of research. They're like, you know what? People really care about money. I'm like, no kidding.
Right.
Like as long as they're healthy, yes, they care about their money. We all have our issues and we all have shame around money and we all have a little bit of embarrassment and we are not sure the right direction. And we've been given this thing called our personal financial life to manage without a lot of ability to do so.
If
any, exactly. And I take this role very seriously. When I first got to CBS, I really only wanted to cover the quote unquote important economic and market stories. And then I have abandoned that. And I'm talking to you this morning after 2 days where yesterday I was on the air talking about the changes that the IRS has made to the tax code because of inflation. Today I talked about estate planning. And you know what? I get the greatest feedback from people who are rich and poor or anything, but they care about these things.
Right. And they care about it. And like you said, it's not sexy, but these are important and it's ubiquitous. And there's a lot of charge around money, like you said, shame and all these emotions. And we're unequipped, generally speaking.
And even the people who think they're equipped are not, okay? Because I come from that world. I come from a Wall Street background. My dad was a trader. I grew up around this world. And I know that there is a lot of, sort of chest thumping in some ways and this is the way it is. And then you kind of scratch beneath the surface and everybody's an insecure child and we all are. And, I sort of look at myself as the very non-judgmental, cool Aunt Jill that everybody wants to have in their lives. I don't want to judge someone who comes to my show and says, I've completely screwed up my life. And I'm like, who cares what happened? Where are you today?
Right.
Where can we get you going next?
Let's deal with what's so.
Exactly. And by the way, I'm not sure. I know that there are people who want to be told what to do. It is not in my nature to be a finger wagger. I think the world is filled with gray. And so I will never do that. the difference, I mean, if someone said to me, what's your special sauce? Why has the show become so popular? I would say that it's because I have a sense of humor about it and that I can tease people and I can also be empathetic and I can hear them and I can have somebody say, I just got a stage 4 cancer diagnosis and I need you to help me figure this out for my family. And that, they'll hear me be very straightforward and then I'll get choked up as I say goodbye to them. And that's real life.
Yeah. Jill, do you think that, going from those 2 weekly, twice a week episodes to then, these are your words, real people. I mean, I can hear the excitement in as you're counting this out, that, that's what the appeal is. That's what the attraction is. That's what has, real people engaged, and probably why your audience has grown as it has, as opposed to, all the work around landing the plane of a jumbo jet of a huge name. What is most exciting about that for you? Like you just said, an example of somebody who has cancer and you're getting choked up. What has that have you more plugged in than the other format?
Well, I mean, the other format is the ego boost. Like, oh, I got to interview Seth Deckman on my podcast, and he is so smart, and he is a known quant. I mean, and I have had some interesting people. But at the end of the day, connecting with the end user, the person who is actually asking me a question, and I am locked in on that person, hearing the question, talking them through, that to me makes me better at my day job at CBS, because when I'm crafting a segment and I have to go do something for evening news or I have to do something for CBS mornings, I'm not thinking about this most important economist who whispered in my ear about something going on. I'm thinking about all the people who have made me better at my job because I am communicating to them, with them, in a way that they can absorb. It's the difference between going to see a doctor who is really smart and is just like an ass and wants to kind of show you how smart he or she is, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the doctor who's like, I don't like, this is weird. I don't know what this is. I need to bring someone else in on this case. And the humanity of a person who's willing to open up and say, I don't know what this is, or this is what I think, but I want to get it confirmed. I am that kind of person.
Yeah. It's a great analogy with a physician or a doctor. It's like the clinical, I have a little bit of a shoulder problem. I play tennis. So I had an MRI done and I had some other imaging done. And I went in and I saw 3 doctors, which is completely not what I normally do. The first 2 grabbed the images right out of my hand and just put them up on the viewer and started looking. The third one that I ended up saying did more clinical. And that sounds like what you're doing. They took the images, they put them on the desk, they touched, they talked, they asked a ton of questions. They asked, what about what do I do with my kids? I mean, it was real. It sounds like you're being more like a clinical doctor as opposed to just relying on the technology or what one expert, a high level economist tells you in the hallway.
Yeah. I mean, we are people. We are flesh and blood. We have emotions. All right. And so if you want, it's funny when I hear sometimes on financial media, I hear these people talking, and am I allowed to curse on our podcast or not?
100%.
Okay. Because I don't do it on my own, but I can do it on others. 9 times out of 10, I'll say, this is such bullshit. I cannot even believe it. I can't believe the person believes what they're actually saying right now because it's so disconnected from reality. It's disconnected. People are not just buying and selling things to make money. They have actual goals. They are not sitting there saying what should I do about this versus it? They're saying, I don't know how to manage this. And, when you talk about that doctor that you went to see, the one that you feel like you felt most comfortable with, of course, if you had a rare type of disease, you go see the best. And if it's some wacko scientist who doesn't speak English, you hope they have a great PA who can talk to you, right?
Exactly.
But for most of us, we want to be seen and heard, right? And I think that that's also part of the process. If you're thinking about booking guests, you know, I'm always very cautious because, you can have the smartest person in the world out there. How are they going to ask you? How are they going to connect with your
Yeah.
audience? What
Yeah.
is going to happen here? And I got to tell you, it's always funny. A good speaker will think on her feet and connect with the audience in a way that surprises them.
Yeah.
So I'll do one little anecdote, which just blew
Please.
away the audience. I was hired to speak to a bunch of aerospace engineers, which are like pretty straightforward, like heavy duty math nerds. Okay. And I remember I was at a hotel and I usually wake up early in the morning to, get on a bike or get on a treadmill. And I went down at 5 o'clock in the morning and every single machine in the whole hotel was actually taken because they were all up early doing the same thing. And everybody was on their Peloton. There were like 7 Peloton bikes. They were all taken. They were all doing power zone training because it's so clinical in numbers. And that's what I love. And so we're in the audience and we're talking. Now, here's what they see on the audience. Like I'm on the dais and I'm talking about the economy and I'm talking about this. And this is a few years ago. And they were asking me about generationally, how do you bring somebody who is young and bring them into the aerospace engineer? It's not like a sexy business. And I said, you always have to be careful not to lump everybody together. And I said, we all do that, right? It's human nature. We want to like sort of categorize, this is my tribe, that's your tribe. You don't know. I said, you know what? You look at me, you're in this audience, and I already teased you guys that I was a math nerd, but you look at me and you have an idea of who you think I am. You think, okay, she is Jill Schlesinger, Upper West Side, lesbian Jew, New York City, and you start to slot me into a different category. And I said, you know what you don't know? You don't know that I had a nephew who was a graduate of Annapolis, who died in Iraq, who was, sort of the pride of the family. And so as a result, I have a different view around what you think my view is going to be around this thing called the aerospace industry. And everybody was silent,
Yeah.
just absolutely silent. And I think that it's okay. You don't want to embarrass anybody. You don't want to make anyone feel bad about anything. But it's also okay to say, hey, you know what? You're looking at me. You've got a judgment of me.
Yeah.
I'm more than all of that. And so is your audience members. They're more than the thing they're coming in for.
And working with you, and I want to underscore this for our listeners and our viewers, that, I use the word provocation, but it's not the negative aspect of it. It's agitate in a positive sense a little bit. And metaphorically, you can call it stop the scroll. But I found working with you, that's what happens, whether it's on the keynote stage or in the moderating, where you're extracting out something that is going to be revealed or unconcealed, if you will, that isn't, a usual kind of suspect of kind of predictably what's being said there. And to your point about your nephew and what people come in predisposed by what they see, you were able to connect things that you value that the audience valued. And it had nothing to do with whether you were a woman or gay or West Side or financial versus aerospace. There were a common set of values, period. And that's beyond labels. I value family. I value serving something bigger than me. I value the engineering and the science that goes behind making sure if it was an aircraft that your nephew was, those are values that are way beyond, if you're 2 blocks from Central Park or not. And that's why I love working with you and bringing you in as a keynote speaker, because you're attuned to connecting that. And again, I'll use the word connective tissue there. But Jill, we're coming to the end here. I do have one more question, if you'll indulge me.
Of course.
I've supported you. You mentioned Peloton, and you have bike ride that you do annually, and you raise a lot of money and it makes a big difference. I want to connect this. You talk about workplace issues frequently, particularly for women, the LGBTQ community. Talk a little bit about that, and maybe even if you can build the bridge to how do you think event industry can do better to support these kind of diverse voices and ensure inclusivity in the professional setting?
I know it's like feels like very out of step to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion means something, but it does, and it does mean that in workplace, and it's more than words; it's actually in actions as well. So look, I'm happy to be the gay gal who gets trotted out during Pride Month. Oh,
Can
it's
I just
June.
make
Can you come talk to us?
Can I just make one facetious comment? I
Please.
I always, this is a little bit tongue in cheek, but this is like true. People think diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're like black, white, male, female, gay, lesbian, this or that. And it's like there's urban, there's rural, there's people that are working on farms, there's aerospace engineers, there are cat people, there are dog people, there are people that never eat out, there are people that always eat out. I mean, the constraint of the diversity, equity, inclusion, or there's people that are disabled or not disabled. It's just mind blowing how limited it is. So I just wanted to soften the ground for you a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's funny is that issues matter all the time in the workplace, right? And we know that there is I think the biggest divide in most workplaces is generational, and it is less about how you kind of get typecast in a role. But what I do think is important is that if you have somebody who can transcend lots of different groups, bring all the groups in. And I'll give you my favorite example of this is I have a very good friend who is a partner at a white shoe law firm in New York. And she wanted to do a book event for me. And she said, I want to do this event. How do you think I should market it? I said, well, I think you should say the women's group, the gay group, and everybody else is invited. And whoever else wants to come. But like you bring if you have people who step through all these different worlds, it's great. Look, I can't not be what I am, right? I am an out gay woman in media who has been on Wall Street. So I understand these worlds very well. But I also understand that there are a lot of voices that feel unheard. And so if you can kind of and it was funny because at the when she announced it, the group, which was, I think like the mothers group was like, well, what about us? And, my friend's like, well, she has 2 dogs. She doesn't have children, but yeah, come on. But people want to participate with people and content that they find compelling. So I just am always careful about like saying, oh, it's Pride Month, let Jill do that. Or it's Pride Month, let me get like my one gay person in the organization, interview the other gay person.
Right.
Like that is so boring. It is so boring. I mean, believe me, pay me enough, I'm sure I'll do it. But I remember I went to a very high profile person and said, I've been asked to do this thing, which is basically a gay group on Wall Street. And I said, if you participate, all the other CEOs will participate. And this guy said, I'll participate, but I don't think there's any reason why I need to be like doing this at this point. It seems like completely ridiculous. And by the way, that was in 2014. And so obviously it was not ridiculous and things still matter. And so what I think is important if you're looking at diversity as in terms of content, you know what? Yeah, you should be concerned if there's like 5 white dudes who are in their 50s up there from the exact same schools. It's going to be boring. They all know each other. It's fun for them. It's not fun for other people. I had one woman.
Nobody wants to be in a sea of sameness all the time. It's just
Exactly. And by the way, I had a woman who opened my eyes to this. I did an event with a woman, and she'd studied diversity in corporations. She was a Black woman. She's now passed away, but she was a Black woman who did incredible research. And what she used to say, which made me laugh out loud, was nobody wants the other to come in. And, people always get like bristled about that. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. I'm so like that. She's like, okay, let me give you an example. And she like talks about this. She goes, I was with 5 professional women and we were talking about shoes that were really comfortable to wear from like the airplane to the stage. And she said, and a guy walked in and we all stopped because we didn't want to be seen as talking about something that was like very female. And she said, and I bet that guy felt really weird and outside of our conversation. And we felt like, oh, you interrupted our good conversation. She's like, so we all feel it. Like we all do feel it. So I think that we have to embrace that, like the more diversity and the mix of people and mix of opinions, it's going to be better. We actually have better interviews when we have different kinds of people. Who would have thought that a woman who is going to do financial stuff for a financial firm is such a Broadway nerd that she's going to go deep into a conversation with Julie Andrews?
Remarkable.
Right?
I mean, remarkable. I'm still, I tell you, I'm still buzzing from that. And it was years ago. It's just so cool. Jill, we have come to the end of the road here. I can't thank you enough, really. I know through the work you do, you make such a difference in people's lives and you hear it all the time, but there are probably listeners that are more than first-time listeners and have never called that you've touched and you haven't been acknowledged for that. And I know you don't do it for the admiration, but just know the difference you're making, even in the dark corners of the airwaves where it's not always so visible or so obvious. I just want to acknowledge and thank you for all the things that you've done for people where you haven't been outrightly thanked and, just very matter-of-factly appreciated for. So thank you for the work you do, really.
Well, thank you, Seth. And I always love talking to you. So I appreciate you. And let's build some great content for anyone who wants us.
Let's do it. And for our listeners, again, thanks for returning. Thanks for coming back. For the first timers, appreciate you giving us a shot. Here at the Keynote Curators podcast, we're just looking to connect great speakers like Jill Schlesinger with you and your audiences and your events to make sure that the content is curated just right, where it can make the most impactful, immediate, lasting difference. We'll see you next time.